Hello everyone. I'm the storyteller from the channel Whispered Tales and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? At what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax. The road was old. Not in the way that roads are worn by time, but in the way a face can be worn by sorrow. The gravel curled like a sleeping serpent through a forest of pines so tall, their tips vanished into mist, as if the sky itself wanted nothing to do with the world below. The car's headlights flickered. Once. Then again. The engine shuddered, coughed, but kept going, barely. The guests kept their hands firm on the wheel, knuckles pale, lips pressed into a thin line. There were no radio stations out here. Just static, like whispering voices pressing against glass. They hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. No signs, either, no gas stations, no turnoffs. Just the curling mountain road and the forest, darker now, crowded close against the edge of the cliff. The inn appeared without warning. It was crouched at the top of a long, uneven driveway, nearly hidden beneath the arch of twisted branches. Its wooden bones were blackened by rain and years. 3 stories tall. Narrow windows. No sign out front. But the headlights caught the faintest glimmer of tarnished brass letters nailed to the gate, Eld Hollow Inn. A place like this shouldn't still exist. The guest parked slowly, gravel crunching under the tires like bones. The forest was utterly silent. No birds. No wind. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath. They stepped out of the car and pulled their coat tighter around them. The air smelled like wet leaves and old stone. The porch steps creaked beneath their weight. A single lantern flickered to life above the door, on its own. Motion sensor, maybe. Or, not. The guest knocked. Once. Then twice. A pause. The door opened with a long groan, as if it hadn't moved in years. A woman stood there. Thin, with silver hair pulled tight into a bun. Her eyes were pale, glassy, as if always looking just past the person she faced. "Welcome," she said, her voice dry as paper. "We've been expecting you." The guest hesitated. "I didn't book ahead." "No," she said, already turning. "But we were expecting you." The lobby was all shadow and varnished wood, lit by the soft, golden pulse of ancient sconces. Dust danced in the air like slow snowfall. There were paintings on every wall, forests, mostly, and faces without eyes. The clock above the fireplace ticked too fast. Or maybe it only seemed that way. "Only one other guest tonight," the woman said, handing over a heavy, rust-colored key. "Room 311. Yours." "Thank you," the guest murmured. She did not smile. "Breakfast is served at dawn. Don't wander at night." "Why not?" "There are staircases that go nowhere. Doors that forget how to open. Mirrors that remember more than they should." She looked at the guest now. "And dreams that walk." The guest laughed, awkwardly. "That's a good one." But she didn't blink. "Don't wander." Room 311 was at the far end of the top floor. The hallway stretched longer than it looked from the lobby, lined with worn carpet and peeling wallpaper. The only sound was the soft wheeze of the floorboards beneath each step. The guest passed room 308. Then 309. Then 309 again. They stopped. Checked the numbers. Yes, another 309. Then 310. Then 309 again. The same door. Same scuff mark near the bottom. Same hairline crack on the number plaque. The guests shook their head, took a deep breath, and kept walking. The hallway curved, only slightly, but enough to make them feel like they were moving in a circle. Finally, room 311. The key clicked in the lock with a reluctant turn, as if it didn't want to fit. The door opened with a breath of cold air, like something had been waiting inside, holding still. The room was modest. A bed, an armchair by the window, an old oil painting of a tree with no leaves. But the mirror above the dresser had a dark stain in the corner that looked suspiciously like a thumbprint. Or a bruise. The guests dropped their bag and sat on the bed. The mattress groaned under their weight. The room smelled faintly of cedar. And beneath that, mildew. Or was it something else? They got up, pulled back the curtains. Outside, the forest pressed close. Not a single light visible between the trees. But the guest thought, just for a moment, they saw something move out there. A flicker. A shape. But when they looked again, the fog was thicker. And the trees were still. That night, the guest couldn't sleep. The sheets were clean but cold. The walls creaked with age. Something tapped behind the headboard, once, then twice, then silence. Pipes, maybe. Maybe. Around 2 a.m., they sat up. There was a sound outside the room. Not footsteps. Not exactly. More like the slow brush of something dragging along the hallway carpet. It passed their door. Stopped. Waited. The guest held their breath. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. Then a whisper, "Are you awake?" They didn't answer. Another knock. Closer this time. Not louder. Just nearer. As if it came from the other side of the wall. They stood, slowly, and tiptoed to the door. Pressed their eye to the peephole. Nothing. But the whisper came again. Not from the hall. From inside the room. "Are you awake now?" The mirror. They turned, fast, but there was only their reflection. Except, it didn't move when they did. There's something about mirrors at night. Even in familiar places, they feel uncertain. A crack in the fabric of the room. A suggestion that maybe the space you see isn't quite the one you're standing in. The guest stared into the mirror, heart racing. Their reflection stared back. Still. Expressionless. Too still. They blinked, and the reflection blinked with them. Delayed. Slightly. But enough to make the guest step back, pulse thudding like a drumbeat in their throat. They turned away. Closed the curtain. Sat on the edge of the bed again, as if returning to the exact place they'd been before would undo everything. Would smooth the wrinkles in the night. Outside, the wind began to howl, not loudly, but persistently. A soft wailing that slipped through the window frame like breath through teeth. And then came the whispering. It started faint. Barely more than suggestion. Like voices 3 rooms over. Words underwater. The guest tilted their head, listening. "It's awake." "No, not yet." "Soon, soon." The voices were inside the walls. The guest stood up slowly. Pressed their ear to the left wall, then the right. The wallpaper was cold. Damp. Beneath it, the whispers slithered like worms in the soil. "Help me," a woman's voice. "Don't sleep." Then silence. Not sudden, like a door slammed shut, but fading. Like something sinking slowly into the deep. The guest pulled away. Shivering. They checked the room again, closet, under the bed, behind the dresser. Nothing. Only the mirror now. Their own eyes, looking back at them. Wide. Unsure. They pulled the blanket over themselves and lay down again. Not to sleep, but to hide. As if a thin layer of cotton could keep the dark things out. Eventually, they did sleep. Not a restful sleep, but something like it. Slipping down into a gray, muffled place where shapes loomed at the edge of consciousness and voices spoke in languages no one had ever spoken aloud. They awoke to knocking. This time, the light outside the window had the color of early dawn, a cold, blue haze. The knocking was not at their door. It was coming from inside the wall. 3 knocks. Hollow. Slow. The kind of knock you hear at funerals, in stories. They sat up, rubbed their face. Their limbs felt heavy. The kind of heavy that doesn't come from sleep but from being watched. The mirror was fogged. Though the room wasn't cold enough to justify it. And someone had written something in the mist. Don't leave. The guest staggered backward. The writing began to fade, slow and deliberate, like fingers pulling away. They watched until it vanished completely. They got dressed. Opened the door. The hallway was dimmer than before, though a few wall lamps flickered overhead. The carpet was faded and looked older than it had last night, like it had aged overnight. Like time in this place moved on its own schedule. Downstairs, the innkeeper was pouring coffee into a bone-white cup. She looked up and smiled, thinly. "You slept," she said. "Good." The guest said nothing for a moment. Then, there was noise. In the walls. She paused. Poured a second cup. "Old building," she said. "Wood contracts. Pipes moan. Dreams leak." "Dreams?" The woman's pale eyes narrowed, but her smile stayed. "You'll want to avoid the east wing. Rooms over there don't know how to forget." "I didn't go to the east wing." "No," she said, and turned back to the counter. "Not yet." The guest took the coffee. It tasted burnt. Bitter. Like smoke and cold stone. The only other person in the dining room sat by the window. A man in a coat that looked a century out of date, with eyes that never blinked and a silver ring on each finger. He didn't eat. Didn't drink. Just watched the trees outside, unmoving. The guest glanced at him once. He didn't look back. After breakfast, the guest returned to their room. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, except the door was now numbered 312. They stopped, staring at the brass numbers. Then looked back down the hall. 310, then 309, then another 309. Same loop. But the room was different now. Slightly. The rug was redder. The mirror was taller. The windows had no latch. Inside, the room felt colder. They checked their reflection. It matched. Moved in sync. But something still felt wrong. As if the version in the glass had different intentions. They turned away. And saw something under the bed. A piece of paper. Folded once. Yellowed. Old. They crouched and pulled it free. It smelled of dust and perfume. On the outside, in tight cursive, to the next guest. They opened it. The handwriting was shaky. If you are reading this, the room already knows your name. You'll forget the days first. Then the roads. Then the way home. Whatever you hear in the walls, don't answer. Don't follow the sounds. And never look into the mirror at night. It remembers things you haven't done yet. There was more, scribbled at the bottom in a rushed, almost panicked hand. The door is a liar. The innkeeper doesn't sleep. The other guest is not alive. The guest dropped the note and stepped back. The floor creaked behind them. They turned, fast. Nothing there. But the mirror now showed 3 reflections. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Outside, the fog never lifted. The forest pressed closer to the windows. The trees looked taller now. Hungrier. In the library downstairs, the guest found books without titles, pages filled with the same sentence over and over: "You are here now. You are here now." You are here now. At dinner, the man in the corner finally spoke. You shouldn't stay in room 311, he said, voice gravel thick. That room opens in both directions. The guest stared at him. What do you mean? He looked up for the first time. His eyes were completely black. Upstairs to the past. Downstairs to the thing under the stairs. The guest opened their mouth to speak. But he held up a single, shaking finger. I didn't check in either, he said. They called me. That night, the whispers returned. More urgent now. Faster. One voice cried out, again and again, wake up. Wake up. It's almost midnight. The mirror hummed. The walls throbbed. And from the hallway came the sound of footsteps, slow, wet, dragging. Something heavy. Something patient. It stopped outside the door. Then knocked. 3 times. Then again. Then the whisper, are you still awake? This time, the guest whispered back. No, a long silence. Then the sound of a smile. Not a voice. Not laughter. But the sound of someone smiling just inches from the door. The whisper returned, good. That's when the door opens. And slowly, the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob stopped turning. Not abruptly. Not as if someone let go, but as if whatever was turning it changed its mind. Slowly. Deliberately. As though it had realized the guest wasn't quite ready yet. A whisper, soft as breath against glass. Not tonight, then silence. Not the kind of silence that feels safe, but the kind that follows something unseen slinking back into the dark. The guest sat on the floor, breath shallow, watching the door. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time in the inn was a creature of its own, stretching and curling however it pleased. Eventually, they stood. Walked to the mirror. Their reflection looked pale. Hollow-eyed. But real. This time, it moved when they moved. Still, they avoided meeting its gaze. Just in case. They turned off the light and climbed under the covers without undressing. The room was too cold. The air too heavy. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it came with the sound of footsteps just beneath the floorboards. They awoke late. Or early. The light leaking through the curtains was gray, timeless. There was no sound from the hallway. The innkeeper was not at the front desk. Downstairs, the dining room was empty. The coffee pot cold. Chairs slightly misaligned, as if they'd been moved and quickly put back. A fire smoldered in the hearth, but there was no heat. The guest returned upstairs. They weren't sure why. Just a pull. And that's when they noticed the new door. At the end of the hall, beyond where the carpet began to fray and the sconces no longer lit, there was now a room 313. It hadn't been there before. The wall had been blank yesterday. The guest was sure of it. But there it was. The brass number plate shone, freshly polished. The door itself was black wood, smoother than the others. No keyhole. No handle. Just a small silver plaque below the number, forgotten guests only. They stood there a long time, staring at the door. Something about it made their skin crawl. It looked flat, like it had no depth. As if opened, it would just fall inward into nothing. They turned away, and the hallway was suddenly longer. Room 311, their room, was now farther than it had been. As if the space between had stretched while they weren't looking. The guest ran. They didn't mean to. But their feet moved faster than their breath could keep up. The carpet blurred. Doors passed in a rush, 308, 309, 310, 309 again. They stopped. Everything was silent again. But room 313 was gone. They entered their room and slammed the door. The key turned twice in the lock this time. Loud. Sharp. And on the bed was a book. An old leather journal. No dust. Open to a page marked with a dried flower. The guest picked it up. The writing inside was neat, elegant. The first page simply read, "Room 313 should never be visible. If you've seen it, it has seen you." They turned the page. Night 3. I heard them again. In the vents. Not mice. Not voices. Something, breathing. Slow and shallow, like it didn't want to be caught. The east wing opened again. It always does when someone checks in who doesn't belong. I don't remember my name anymore. I don't think the innkeeper ever had one. But the room remembers everything. There were more pages. Most filled with descriptions of sounds, dragging footsteps, clicking fingernails, someone crying softly just behind the walls. And over, a single repeated phrase, "Don't open the locked room." The guest closed the journal. They looked around. Everything was exactly as it had been, and yet it felt entirely changed. The air was thicker. The light through the window a dull copper. The bedspread had a new stain that hadn't been there an hour ago. They walked to the window and looked out. The forest was closer again. The trees were pressed up to the glass now, knotted branches bent like fingers, as if reaching toward the room. And at the tree line stood something. Tall. Still. Watching. It was too far to see clearly, but the guest could tell it was facing them. And that it had no face at all. They needed to leave. Now. They threw clothes into their bag, grabbed their key, and opened the door, just as the lights in the hallway went out. Click. All of them. One by one. A long stretch of darkness swallowed the corridor, creeping forward like oil. From the far end, where room 313 had once appeared, came a low sound. Breathing. Not human. Not animal. Something between. Wet, shuddering breath, as though lungs were filled with something that wasn't air. Then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. The guest stepped back into the room and closed the door. Locked it. Moved a chair in front of it. Then stood in the center of the room, frozen. Something brushed the wall. A knock. Soft. Then another. And another. But not at the door. At the mirror. They turned, trembling. The reflection was there, but now, behind the reflection, something moved. A figure. Shadowed. Taller than the guest. Leaning forward as if whispering something into their mirrored ear. And the reflection smiled. But the guest hadn't. They ran. Out the door, down the hall. No plan. Just away. Away from the room, the mirror, the impossible reflection. The hallway twisted as they moved, turning corners that hadn't been there before. Narrowing. At last, they stopped. Panting. Before them was a single wooden door. Room 313. It was back. And this time, it was open. Just a crack. Darkness spilled from the gap like ink in water. Not lightless, but wrong. The kind of dark that feels thick. Watching. A voice from inside. "You already sleep here." The guest took one step back. And the floor vanished beneath them. They fell. Not down a staircase. Not into a hole. They fell sideways. The world twisted, impossible. The inn's walls turned inside out. Rooms slid past them, upside down, sideways, doors opening into more darkness. They landed hard. Wood. Dust. The smell of mildew and old blood. They were in another room now. Smaller. circular. A single mirror on each wall, 8 of them, surrounding the guest. Each one reflected a different version of themselves. Some older. Some bloodied. One was smiling. The smiling one stepped forward from its mirror, hands pressed against the glass. "You were warned," it whispered. And the glass began to crack. The first mirror cracked. Just a hairline fracture, like a spider's thread across the surface. But the smiling reflection didn't flinch. It kept pressing, fingers spreading on the glass. The skin of its hands peeled back as it pushed, exposing something underneath. Not bone. Not flesh. Something older. The other mirrors started to hum. A low, vibrating sound that filled the chest and teeth. The room felt like it was breathing around the guest, slow, pulsing breaths that pulled in shadows and exhaled dust. The guest stumbled backward, heart pounding. The smiling reflection's mouth moved, whispering words that didn't reach the ears, only the bones. They covered their face. Turned. Reached for anything, a door, a wall, a break in the mirrors. And found a handle. One door. Hidden in the pattern of the 8th mirror. Without thinking, they grabbed it and pulled. The sound of cracking glass was deafening. And then, quiet. They stepped through. Into fog. Thick, heavy, soupy fog that swallowed light and sound. Their breath puffed out in front of them and disappeared into the gray. There was no wind. No sun. No sky. Only fog. And the path. A narrow dirt trail beneath their feet, bordered by twisted trees that seemed half-formed. Branches that bent like limbs. Bark that looked like skin. The guests didn't know where they were, or how far they'd fallen from the inn. They just knew they had to keep walking. Behind them, the sound of shattering glass echoed once. Then silence. They walked for what felt like hours. Maybe days. Time blurred in the fog. They passed signs nailed into tree trunks. Faded, illegible. One still had a few words carved into it, "Turn back never." Eventually, they reached a clearing. At the center stood a house. Old. Crooked. Sagging under the weight of forgotten years. It looked like it had grown from the ground itself, roots for beams, moss for shingles. The windows were all wrong, too tall, too narrow, and too many. But the door was open. And inside, someone hummed. The guest stepped forward. Slowly. As if their legs no longer moved by their own will. The humming stopped. And a voice floated from within, "Come inside. You've been expected." The room inside was lit by candlelight. Hundreds of small candles flickering on every surface, tables, shelves, the floor. The walls were lined with photographs, none in frames. All yellowed, curling at the edges. Each photo was of the same person. The guest. But in different places. Different times. One showed them as a child, standing outside a house they'd never seen. Another showed them in a hallway, looking at a door that wasn't there. Another, they stopped. One photo showed them asleep. In room 311. From the angle of the mirror. Their reflection must have taken it. A soft creak behind them. They turned. And saw her. She looked like the innkeeper, but older. Or maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Her face shimmered in the candlelight, features shifting slightly with each flicker. She wore black. No shoes. And her voice was lined with something dry and old, like the sound of parchment cracking. "You've walked too far," she said. "The fog doesn't like that." The guest tried to speak, but no sound came. She approached, and as she did, the room seemed to stretch. The candles bent toward her, as if drawn by gravity. "You asked to rest," she said. "But you dreamed too loud." She reached out and touched the guest's forehead with one long, cold finger. And suddenly, they remembered. A house. A road. A storm. Something lost in the woods. Running. The silhouette of a building through the trees, a warm light in the middle of nowhere. The inn. They hadn't chosen to stay. They had needed to. And the room had offered comfort. A bed. A door. A reflection that smiled. It had offered to forget. But they had remembered. And that had broken the rules. The woman stepped back. Her smile was pitying. "It's not personal," she said. "It's the nature of the place. Memory attracts the hungry." The fog outside pressed against the windows, writhing like smoke. Whispering. "You can't leave," she said gently. "But you can choose what to forget." She held out her hand. In her palm, an old brass key. The number etched into it, 313. The guest stared at it. Their heart beat faster. The key felt warm. Somewhere in the distance, they heard footsteps again. The others were coming. Those who had chosen not to forget. Those who had asked questions. The ones who stayed awake too long in their rooms. The guests who read too far into the journals. "I won't take it," the guest whispered. The woman's eyes dimmed. "Then you'll keep falling," she said. And the floor vanished beneath them again. They hit the ground hard. Wooden boards. Dust. Candlelight. But this time, familiar. They were back. Room 311. The same blanket. The same mirror. The same suitcase half-zipped. It was as if no time had passed. They stood up slowly. Walked to the mirror. And this time, their reflection smiled first. On the nightstand sat a letter. The envelope was sealed with black wax. The guest opened it. Inside, "You've been given one more night. When you wake, you will not remember this warning. But the fog will wait. And the mirror will keep watching. One more night. Then choose. Rest. Or remember." The guest folded the letter. Lay down on the bed. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. In the hallway, a door opened. And footsteps padded softly past room 311. Someone else had checked in. The dream was thick this time. No voices. No faces. Just the sensation of drowning in fog, soft, slow, strangely peaceful. A weightless fall into something vast and breathing. When the guest awoke, it was dark. Truly dark. The lamps didn't work. The window showed nothing, no moon, no stars. Just blackness, like the glass had been painted over. They lit a candle from the nightstand. Its flame flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. And then, a whisper. Not from the hallway. From within the room. "You're still here." The guest stood, candle in hand. Turned slowly. In the corner, by the closet door, stood a figure. Thin. Pale. Dressed in the same clothes the guest wore. The same face, but older. Worn down. "I stayed too," the figure said. The guest couldn't speak. The figure tilted its head. "You think you're the first. We all wake up thinking the same thing. That we just need one more night. One more chance to understand. To remember." Its eyes were black, like burned-out sockets. Yet it smiled softly, almost kindly. "The inn doesn't keep us. We keep ourselves." It pointed toward the mirror. "The moment you saw what smiled back, you should have left." "I tried," the guest whispered. The figure nodded. "Yes. But you remembered. And now it remembers you." There was a pause. Then the closet door creaked open behind it. Inside, darkness. No coats. No hangers. Just space. And movement. A hand reached out from the dark inside the closet. Thin, jointed the wrong way. It curled around the edge of the door frame and pulled the space wider. From within, whispers spilled out. Hundreds of them. Voices layered and desperate. Don't look at it. I never left. It remembers my name. The guest list never ends. The figure, the other guest, stepped backward into the closet and began to vanish into shadow. You have one more chance, it said. If you find the room that doesn't exist, forget. And then it was gone. The door swung shut. The whispers stopped. The hallway was different again. Longer. Uneven. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing another pattern underneath, older, floral, damp with time. The sconces were all out, but the candle's flame held steady. Room 313 was gone. Now there was only a staircase. One the guest had never seen. Winding downward, beneath the inn, into the foundation. And beneath that, maybe even farther. They descended. Each step creaked. The air grew colder, sharper. The flame dimmed as if struggling against something invisible. Halfway down, they passed a door set into the wall. It had no number. But carved into it, roughly, was a phrase, for those who remembered. The guest didn't open it. They kept going. At the bottom of the stairs, a door made of iron. No handle. Just a handprint, rusted and deep, pressed into the metal. The guest placed their palm against it. And the door opened inward. The space beyond was vast. An impossible library. Endless shelves, filled not with books, but with journals. All identical to the one they had found in their room. Leather-bound. Unlabeled. Each one belonged to a guest. Each one a story. Each one unfinished. Shadows drifted between the stacks. Tall, slow-moving. Watching without eyes. The guest stepped forward, drawn toward one particular shelf. There, a journal. Their name on the spine. They pulled it free. The last written page was the one they had read before. But now, the pen rested on the edge of the journal. Waiting. Something in the air around them shifted. It wants you to finish the story. They looked down. And began to write. I remembered too much. I saw the room that sees. I dreamed loud enough for the others to find me. But I haven't turned back. Not yet. I want to know who the inn was built for. I want to know what's behind the last door. As they finished the sentence, the flame of the candle flared blue. The shelves began to move. Not physically, spatially. As if the library were rearranging itself to show the way. The path ahead cleared. And at the end of it, a door with no journal beside it. No guest had written what lay beyond. Not yet. The guest stepped through. It was a room. But not any room in the inn. It was their childhood bedroom. Exactly as they remembered it. Down to the scratches on the floor and the crooked curtain rod. There was no sound. No movement. Just the soft scent of the past, clinging to the air. They crossed to the desk. On it, another mirror. This one showed the inn. Room 311. Lit by candlelight. And inside it, sleeping peacefully, the guest. Still. Breathing. Safe. They were still in the bed. Everything else had been the dream. Or the memory. Or something in between. The mirror rippled. The room dimmed. And a voice spoke softly, from behind them. The voice of the innkeeper. Of the woman in black. Of the guest who stayed. All at once. There is still time. But not much. If you wish to forget, sleep. If you wish to stay, the voice paused. Write one more line. The guest looked down. The journal was there, open once more. The pen hovered. One line would change everything. Stay, and remember. Or sleep, and forget. They closed their eyes. And the pen touched paper. The line was written. Ink dried across the page like a final breath. The flame of the candle didn't flicker, it simply vanished. And with it, the room. The desk. The mirror. The scent of childhood. Gone. The guest opened their eyes and stood once more in the corridor outside room 311. But something had changed. The hallway was perfectly still, too still. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel like silence, but like waiting. Every door was closed. Every light dim. The guest glanced behind them. And there it was again. Room 313. Back. And wide open. This time, there was no hesitation. No fear. Just the pull. They stepped forward. Room 313 was not a room at all now. It was a long corridor, lined with doors on both sides, hundreds of them, repeating endlessly into shadow. Each one bore a small brass tag, not with numbers, but names. C. Wren. A. Lowell. J. Harper. E. Mercer. And at the far end, one door with their name. They moved toward it. As they walked, the corridor behind them vanished, absorbed by the dark, erased by fog. The doors whispered as they passed, some gently, others with desperate hunger. A voice inside one murmured, "Please don't forget me," another sobbed, "I never meant to stay." The guest reached their door. Placed a hand upon it. It opened without sound. Inside, nothing. A dark, featureless space. No furniture. No windows. No mirror. Just air, warm and pulsing, like a living heart. A shape formed in the center of the void. Human in outline. Flickering in and out of focus. Its voice sounded like the guest's own, but deeper. "Warn. You chose to know," it said. "So now you must carry it." "Carry what?" the guest asked. But they already knew the answer. The memory. The burden of seeing behind the reflection. The weight of a place that was never built, only remembered. "You can leave," the voice said. "But you'll never be free." The guest nodded. And for the first time, the shadow smiled, not a cruel smile, not the hollow grin of the mirror. But something close to sorrow. "You'll dream of the inn forever," it whispered. "And it will wait for you, every time you close your eyes." The room faded. And the guest awoke. In room 311. Sunlight. Actual sunlight streamed through the curtains. The birds outside chirped as if nothing had ever happened. The suitcase was still packed. The coffee pot downstairs was hot. And the innkeeper was nowhere to be seen. At the front desk, a note waited, "Thank you for staying. You'll find your way back again, when you're ready. Until then, remember gently." The inn. They left. Stepped out into the morning light. The trees had returned to their place at the edge of the clearing. The sky was a soft gray blue. The forest was just a forest. And yet, as they reached the car, they saw someone else approaching the inn. A new guest. Luggage in hand. Eyes tired. Looking for rest. They paused. Thought about warning them. About mirrors and doors and dreams that never end. But the guest simply watched. Because some things aren't meant to be stopped. Just remembered. That night, in a city far away, the former guest lay in their own bed. They stared into a mirror across the room. It reflected nothing strange. No movement. No smile. And yet, as they drifted toward sleep, they heard the softest whisper in their ear. "Welcome back." They closed their eyes. And in the silence, a hallway began to stretch. A door began to form. And the key to room 313 turned once more.